So Storm goes beyond Omega level and becomes one of the most powerful mutants to ever exist in the history of Marvel Comics, and it's nuts. Check this out. So this takes place during Sins of Sinister, but unlike the other videos that we did that took place 10 years after Sinister had basically conquered the world, took over the mutant population, took over the Avengers, the whole 9 yards, this takes place 100 years later. So things have changed drastically since the last videos that we covered, and not in a very good way. So this initially picks up with Marvel Boy, also known as Novar. A little bit of history here. This version of Marvel Boy was introduced back in 2000 in his own solo series. He's okay. I mean, in my personal opinion, I think it was just an attempt by Marvel Comics to take a Kree warrior from an alternate reality, give him like insect DNA, and kind of make him like a blend between like the Kree and Spider-Man. It was cool. Marvel Boy does not suck. He's fun to read, but that's just kind of my perception on the character. The important thing here is that he's much, much older. Now, as a lot of you guys are probably wondering, with this being 100 years in the future, why aren't these people as old or even dead like they should be? One of the things to remember is that when it came to the X-Men on Krakoa, they had a lot of technologies that came from the island that allowed them to basically violate death. Either it was resurrection, pills that prolonged their life. So there's a lot of under the current stuff that was already established that's just kind of being rolled over into this, and not a lot of explanation is being given, which I think is a bad thing, because I think there are people who are unfamiliar with the X-Men that are jumping on to Sins of Sinister, and because it's kind of an isolated, self-contained story, it can cause problems. But what ends up going on is, of course, once they get to the ship, and they basically not only give the access code for this round, but the one that actually comes the following week, that's when it's revealed they're actually meeting with Destiny, or at least Destiny's on the ship, and she's being brought to meet with Storm. Now, there's history here, and we'll go over that over the course of this video. We'll make it all make sense. But Destiny showing up here, things have gotten bleak for her, because one of the things to know is that, yes, while Destiny is a precognitive, meaning she can see the future, one of the things we've always talked about is that her ability to decipher what's going to happen is relative to how far in the future she's looking. If she tells you something's going to happen in 100 years, take it with a grain of salt, because a lot can happen between now and 100 years from now. But if she says something's going to happen in 5 minutes, take it as an absolute truth. The thing about this is that she oftentimes uses her own abilities to see the future to kind of work for herself, right? To ensure her own schemes and motivations are satisfied first. Then she worries about everybody else second. So she's like the most American person ever. So the thing here is that once she arrives, a lot of people have aged up, right? For example, Cable is older than he was before, and in fact, even his technology has changed. Now, the reason why I say that is that for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Cable, we are not going to go into the origin of his character, because I made a 35-minute video on that, and even then I was cramming stuff in. You'll find a link to that video pinned as a comment if you're interested. But Cable is one half human and one half machine, but the techno-organic virus was always like eating away at his body. What's going on here is that he's now merged with a kind of organic technology, so it's more of a symbiosis as opposed to a parasitic infection. But for Destiny herself, what we end up finding out is that somewhere along the line, Mystique left her, right? Mystique left to go pursue her own destiny, in the sense that she wanted to help the rebel forces try to defeat Sinister and his forces. The X-Men, the Avengers, the surviving superheroes, basically. Anybody who was under the influence of Sinister. What's so cool about this is that when she did it, she reunited Freedom Force. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, Freedom Force? No way! She's literally like, on your feet, Freedom Force, for the rebellion. And I was like, bro, like Freedom Force hasn't been a thing in Marvel Comics for decades. Unless I'm missing something, Freedom Force hasn't been a thing for years. The important thing here, Freedom Force was basically Mystique's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants reworked into a superhero team and working for the Commission on Superhuman Activities, specifically Valerie Cooper. That all happened during Chris Claremont's run back in the 1980s in the X-Men, but Freedom Force was amazing back then. I loved them. It was one of the coolest ideas ever. But basically Mystique's dead, right? She ended up dying for the cause. And so once Destiny finally gets before Storm, Storm's a lot older than she used to be, but do not let her fool you, man. She is every bit as powerful as she used to be, and actually more so. Like, it's nuts how capable she is. But one of the things Destiny says is that with the death of Mystique, it's now changed the landscape, because where a lot of her machinations and seeing the future and kind of manipulating pieces and so on were to ensure the survival of herself and Mystique, that they could have some measure of a happy life together, the reality is that now things are different, right? With Mystique being gone and out of the picture, now Destiny's focusing on the bigger picture itself. How do we find a way to end the rule of Sinister? Now, one of the things to remember here is that there are a handful of Sinisters running around right now. Back in the day in Marvel, there was only one, but what we've learned is there's actually four. You have Mother Righteous, you have Orbis Stellaris, you've got the main Sinister with the diamond on his head, and then you've got Dr. Stasis, right? So one of the things to understand is that with Sins of Sinister, this story focuses on the influence and the control of the diamond-headed Sinister, right? The original Sinister, quote unquote, if you want to call him that. But again, what goes on here is that a coming together of Storm's forces alongside Destiny launch an attack against Orbis Stellaris, just one of the Sinisters that are out there. It makes the most logical sense because the stories of Storm focus more on space than anything else, but taking out each one of the Sinisters in turn would ultimately allow them to focus all their efforts on the main Sinister. Now, one of the other things to remember that we covered in the first video is that you had Moira McTaggart, that her mutant power was that every time she died, the timeline reset. And so what ended up happening is that in order to prevent that from happening, or at least Sinister resetting the timeline and restarting his experiment, that the original attack of Storm and her forces was capturing the Moira McTaggart clones, which basically prevented Sinister from resetting everything. So that's why this universe has just continued on the way that it has, as opposed to being reset and changed somewhere along the lines. And so what this does is this transitions to Storm and her team arriving at the Death Sphere. Now the Death Sphere, which kind of looks like a Death Star, is pretty awesome. This is the result of the work of Orbis Stellaris over the course of 100 years, where this guy was originally just a Sinister that was out there, that by using the progenitors, which are some pretty murky concepts in Marvel kind of teases the idea that they predate the Celestials, maybe they were created by the Celestials, maybe they created the Celestials. It's just one of those inconsistent things that's been going on ever since their appearance in the Royals comics back in the day. But the point is that with these progenitors and the level of power that they possess, that in a lot of ways, Orbis Stellaris and the progenitors have been working together. That what Orbis Stellaris wanted to do was use the power of the progenitors to actually conquer the entirety of the universe. Now, of course, this runs in direct defiance with the diamond-headed Sinister, who's starting on Earth, conquering the entirety of the superhero community and spreading himself outward. But ultimately, it would all come to a head with these guys most likely waging war against each other. Such as it is, that's actually not what's going to happen here. Instead, one of the things to remember is that in the last video that we covered, that when it came to the Moira McTaggarts, which is to say, again, Moira's ability to basically die and then reset the timeline, that what had happened is that where the effort was made by Storm and her team to basically take all the Moira McTaggarts and then remove them from Sinister with the diamond on his head so he couldn't reset the timeline and then start all over again, the Moiras in turn were taken from Storm and then brought to Orbis Stellaris by Destiny herself, who again was manipulating everything behind the scenes. But with Orbis Stellaris having the Moiras at his disposal, the nature of this plan that they have that was formed under Destiny is really ingenious. That what's actually happened here, and for those of you guys who are familiar with Star Wars, this will be very reminiscent of battle meditation, that what had actually happened here is that Korra, who has the ability to amplify the powers of anybody around her, had amplified the abilities of Destiny, basically moving her precognitive abilities to a more fine-tuned point where she could actually tell exactly what's going to happen moments before it happens. The reason why this is so important is that alongside Cable's telepathy, what it does is it allows Destiny to predict exactly what the ships of Orbis Stellaris are going to do, and then to navigate through them and to get around them. So this is why I say it's very much a battle meditation kind of thing. But this is all important because of the fact that when Storm's team arrives here, what ends up happening is Orbis Stellaris, most likely in a state of hubris, ends up seeing the kind of ragtag band of Storm. He views it more as a kind of last ride of Storm and the Brotherhood. They intend to die, right? Prepare for ramming speed, that kind of a thing. And so he sends out all of his forces. But with Destiny at their disposal and being able to move in between all these ships, a way out is a way in. And the reason why I say that is because the forces of Storm actually end up moving past all the vessels and then fly into the exact docking bay that the ships are using to get out of the Death Sphere in the first place. But once the doors shut, there's nobody there to protect the inside of the sphere, which in a lot of ways gives Storm and her forces free reign. But it's a really smart maneuver here, because when that happens, what we end up finding out is that in the initial conversation between Storm and Destiny, that with Mystique out of the picture, what Destiny wanted to do was basically wipe out all the Moras, right? Kill one or all of them, reset the timeline, and take everything back to the way it was supposed to be. The fact that her and Mystique could continue to live some measure of a life is the only reason she hadn't done it, but the actions of Destiny is actually what led to the deaths of Storm's original Brotherhood team in the first place. So Storm does continue to hold on to a vendetta, and this comes to a head when Storm decides to betray the plan and then orders Korra to kill Destiny on the spot. Now, whether or not Destiny saw this coming or even potentially realized it was just the end result of her fate, this is where she died, and that was basically it, we don't necessarily know. But what we do know is that with Destiny killed, the rest of the team doesn't really understand what's going on here. And even Marvel Boy asked the question, he's like, I don't get it. We got here and then we're not blowing up the Moras? Like, this is the whole reason we came on this mission, to blow up the Moras, reset the timeline, and set everything back to normal. But the response of Storm is that yes, this place is hell, but a hell that still supports life and thus supports hope, which seems like a nonsensical statement, right? Like, yes, we have the opportunity to destroy all the Moras and reset the timeline, but if we keep them alive, this horrible universe continues on, and the people in it have hope that things can get better. It's like, but I mean, you can make them better right now by wiping out the timeline. So I mean, you know, like, just wipe out the timeline. Like, it's one of those things that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I submit that yes, Storm has become a lot more powerful, but in her old age, she's also going senile, and that's why she makes the decision that she makes. It's the only way to make it make sense. But then she also starts to realize that, again, inside the core of the Death Sphere are the progenitors, and that they are astronomically powerful. The only reason they allied themselves with Orbis Stellaris is because they had a mutual goal. But once the progenitors realized that Storm and her Brotherhood are here, and that they would most likely end up destroying the combined experiment of the progenitors and Orbis Stellaris, they would manifest, they would step in, and then Storm and her forces wouldn't stand a chance. And so in order to ensure that doesn't happen, and this is why I say Storm's level of power just absolutely skyrockets, that in order to ensure that doesn't happen, that Korra, under the direction of Storm, amplifies Storm's powers even further, right? Her ability to control the weather, it's all amplified. And then in turn, Storm taps into the magics of her ancestors and then rips open a black hole. And when that happens, it pulls the progenitors and even the core of the world farm through, right? The world farm is where they're basically experimenting and all that kind of stuff. Now, the progenitors do end up basically leaving and focusing on their own individual worlds. But lest we forget, the idea of Storm opening up a gravity well in space, that's astronomical, because what you're now talking about here is reality warping, right? She's a low-level reality warper, but she's manipulating matter on the atomic level. And this is why I say, when you're talking about Omega-level mutants, even Storm herself directly addressing this, right? To be Omega-level means to be without limits, that in effect, every Omega-level mutant has a level of power that in some capacity allows them to manipulate the structure of matter. That's why there's no limit to their abilities, right? Somebody with high-level telekinesis can manipulate matter. Somebody who has low-level telekinesis can manipulate matter. They move objects around, but a person who practices that telekinesis long enough, specifically if they're an Omega-level mutant with no upper limit, then it's only a matter of time before moving a chair around a room turns into moving molecules around and restructuring matter. And that's exactly what Storm just did. She used her power to manipulate weather, which is in and of itself manipulating molecules, even if it only affects weather in a localized space. And she's expanded this out to now controlling the atomic structure or the molecular structure of matter within a localized space. Again, she's not Franklin Richards level, but the ability to alter matter in a localized space is massive. But here's one of the beautiful things about this, or tragic if you want to consider it that. With Orbis Stellaris realizing that the jig is up, right? This is a losing game. There's no way for him to come out on top anymore, that it's all basically over, that he shuts down life support within the system itself. It basically kills everybody inside the ship outside of Storm and her forces, but with Storm exerting so much power at one time, she can't survive the experience, and Storm dies. And so this is amazing, because literally she goes out with a bang. And so in turn, her Brotherhood seizes control of the ship of Orbis Stellaris, and then most likely starts using it as a beachhead, and they're continuing war against the forces of the Sinisters that are trying to manipulate and conquer the entirety of the Marvel Universe. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.